few years ago, I discovered that I was in love with a married man. Well, in hindsight, I've realized that I wasn't really in love, but at that time, I felt and I thought that I was. And trust me, I don't say that with pride, and it wasn't something that I knowingly entered into. In fact, I think shame and disappointment in myself is one of the reasons why I didn't share it as soon as I would have liked. You know, I even think back to where I was then. I think it's important, even before I go into the story, I think when you hear mistress, the first thing you think is, oh my gosh, like, ugh. And I can understand that because that was how I felt about myself, you know. I had a student and somebody asked me once, like, how I was able to be so open and honest about my mistakes and things that I've done. And I think it's because there's nothing that anybody can say to me, whether it be positive or negative, that I haven't already said to myself. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think shame and guilt is something that, especially within the Black community, that we aren't taught to deal with. And so for many of us and most of us, we suppress it, you know, and we try to forget about it, although it ends up showing up in other ways. And so when I think too, when you hear the word mistress, especially when you think about how it's depicted on TV and in media, a lot of times it's someone who knowingly, you know, is breaking up a happy home and it's okay with it. And I think that's not the case for everyone, and it definitely isn't the case for me. And that was something that I had to process. And of course I had the help of a therapist to help me through that. But it was just this idea of me being coming from a broken home. And that was, again, one of those things that I said I would never do. Like, those who know me know that I am all about women empowerment, especially Black women. And so to even think that I was a part of a breaking up a family or destroying a home was just like mortifying to me. And it was something that I never thought I would do. And I said that to myself. But it's one of those situations that you don't realize that you're in until you're in the middle of it. I think too, and it's something that, again, I have learned to forgive myself for, and even that gentleman and his wife, we've been able to reconcile, and they've reconciled, and we're actually we have a very polite and distant relationship now, but we have been able to heal and move past that. But when it was first happening, I can't tell you how often I beat myself up about it. I think we did it a lot, but sometimes, you know, again, I think it comes from this idea of, and I think I would even say at that time, it was very much about isolation for me. It was after I had gotten out of my domestic violent relationship, and so, or domestically abusive relationship, and so I can't say that I was in my strongest season. In fact, I was very vulnerable and very skeptical and very distrusting of people. And if you know, just knowing, just even a little teeny bit, you know, about my life, especially when it came to areas of relationships and men, I've always lacked security and safety. So much so that I had built this self-reliant, independent me. Something that I actually used to pride myself on, but I mean, now that I'm a little older, I'm learning the importance and the strength that goes into vulnerability. But at that time, I didn't know that. And so I was so used to being super strong and super tough that when I was in that very isolated, because that's what it does, right? A very isolated season. I think sometimes when you go through something that's so painful, so traumatic, so hurtful, you tend to tell yourself that it's just you and that you're the only person who's done this. You're the only person who's going through it or who has ever gone through it. And so, like, you know, you just continue to beat yourself up. And that caused me to isolate myself from others. It didn't help that I had moved to the Midwest. And so I was away from my family, away from my friends, away from anything that I knew it was familiar. And that is the best place for, right, the devil to come, okay? He like, you know, they say that two is better than one, because, you know, when one falls, the other can pick you up. And so many times I know I am a self-isolator. And when you're alone, that's the best time for him to attack. And that's when you're at your most vulnerable. And so I was struggling with just still questioning myself of how did I get there? How did I allow myself to be a victim of domestic abuse? You know, how did I make that mistake? And just like so hell-bent on not getting there again and redeeming myself. And so when I did meet that gentleman, he was just, I think I fell in love with the fact that he was the complete opposite of my previous relationship. I think sometimes we do that, right? Our desire to just not make the same mistake again will have us go into the other end of the spectrum, right? But I've learned that extremes on either end are dangerous. And so I was attracted to him because he was the complete opposite of my ex-boyfriend. He was older and more experienced and more mature. He had a very even, calm demeanor and tone, and he was non-threatening at all. I knew that he had kids, that he had children, and so, you know, just again, a level of maturity he owned. But he was mature, and you know, he had businesses, he had money, right? But also he gave me from day one a sense of security. And so I think, and sometimes again, I think in that of, when I go back and I say that I don't know if I was in love, I think it's because, you know, I love the feeling. Now, I mean, I now know that it wasn't real and it was something that I created, but it was for the first time, I'm like, okay, I think I feel safe here. And I fell in love with the idea of safety and comfort. I tell my clients sometimes like that sometimes life is like a chair, right? When a chair is uncomfortable, what do? You can't seem to, you know, find your spot, so you're constantly moving, you know, you don't see it, and eventually you get up, right? Because the chair isn't comfy. But when a chair is comfortable, you have a tendency to stay in it longer, right? And so while it wasn't ideal, and even today, I realized that I didn't really know him and he didn't really know me. I fell in love with comfort. You know, he was, for the first time, I had someone, and again, it came from him being older and more mature, and of course, him having money. He was the first guy who, like, had real money. I've dated men who had money, but he was the first one who had, like, money that I could actually, you know, use, which is also why I think it's so dangerous when I hear these songs and I hear the music and the media constantly depicting to young women the importance of getting a man with money, and even that it's telling men that the importance of having money, because having money does not make him a man, and having money does not create security or safety. Okay, and I'm saying right now, being around it and being in it, you can have somebody who's financially secure, but is insecure in so many other areas. And it's not worth it, right? Real money, real wealth, you'll learn. And sometimes I had to learn through trial and error, but you'll learn it's not it's not what you think it is. And I think that's dangerous for women because you're seeking the wrong security. But then also I think it's dangerous for men because they feel like they don't have to offer security. And I'm speaking very general here, so it's not an apply all. I don't think that all men are that way, and I've met plenty of gentlemen who are not that way. But there's danger in believing that the only thing that you were put on this earth to provide women is financial security. There are other levels. There's emotional, there's mental, there's spiritual security. And I don't know if we, especially within our community, impart that and teach that to young men. And so that was something that I knew and it was beat into my head at a young age, the importance of having a man, who could take care of me and my family. And so I appreciated that about him. But now that I think about it, I was still very much an independent lady when I was dating him. And for that reason, I don't think I dug enough into his life and asked enough questions, which I think is also important, ladies, especially, or gentlemen. When you're getting to know a person, I think sometimes, especially in today's, say, we have all these situationships, and we forgot, what it means to date. One of my mentors says that, he said dating is, or I think I heard it in a sermon, but dating is data, right? And that when you're dating someone, you're dating with the intent of learning more about them and getting to know them. And at that, I've never really, outside of like my current relationship and my mom taking me on a first date, I don't know if I was actually properly taught how to date. And so at that time, I was not asking the right questions. And I definitely wasn't downloading the right data. And I take full responsibility for it. One thing about me is I'm an open book and I own my stuff, right? And that sometimes you don't know better until you know, right? And so, of course, I met him and I was in a very vulnerable, isolated state, and he provided a sense of comfort and security. But more importantly, and mind you, at that time I was being in a new city, in just a lot of transition. He came to my rescue quite a bit, and it felt good to have somebody who I could actually call for help. And this is not to say that I didn't have a strong community, I didn't have a family, because I did. But many a times, and in most of my relationships, even to this day, I am the person that people call. Like when they need something, I am who they call. But it's very seldom that when I need something that I had people who were in the position to help me. And not that they wouldn't want to. If they couldn't, they wouldn't try, but they just weren't in the position to help me, whether that's financially, emotionally, mentally. And that's also on me. I think it's important that you surround yourself with people who not only have cups that you pour into, but you need to surround yourself with people who also pour into your cup. And I didn't realize that around that time, I didn't have that many people pouring into my cup. And definitely not as many as I have now. And so it was nice to have somebody who was pouring in my cup. And that's what he did. I think I fell in love with that because it was the closest thing that they say you marry your father, or you marry your mother, right? And I think being that I didn't have a father in my life, it kind of filled that void. It was that thing that I love when I see girls who go, I'm gonna tell my daddy on you, and like I love when I get to see daddy's girls, because I think that's important, and I didn't have it. And so he filled the void that I didn't even know was there. And I think that is what I fell in love with. And so I met this man and he was super great. And I liked him because and now I understand why, but I was able to date him, but still live my life. At that time, I was young in my career. So I was super, super driven and super busy all the time. And I was always doing a bunch of things. And so it was nice to have someone who wasn't annoyed with me being busy. Prior to that, it was hard for me to date. And it's always been hard for me to date because men are at least the men that I meet, we're always so used to having someone who is just around to wait for them, wait on them hand and foot. And I am a hustler in my own right. That's why I love couples. I don't idolize couples because everybody has their issues, but I love couples where I see the man and the woman. Like I love gender equality, and that I believe that yes, you know what I'm saying? I allow a man to be a man, but I also need him to allow me to be a boss in my own right, because I am. And I have purpose outside of being a wife and a mother. And I've always known that. And so that relationship allowed me to do that. Now I understand that he was juggling two essentially two lives. He was living two separate lives in two households. And so I gave him the freedom to do that. And I didn't ask him any questions because whenever I needed him, he showed up. Granted, it wasn't all the time, which also means I was low maintenance, which is why I probably the most, and I'm laughing, I'm joking, but I'm serious, right? But I'm one of the best mistresses to have. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm not the girl to be hiding in bushes and going through phones, and I don't have time. If I got to do all that, bye. You know, and I think that he knew that, and he took advantage of that, him being older. Also, like, you know, at that time I was young and I just thought I knew it all. I think, you know, advancing so much in my career and all that I've accomplished, it gave me the false idea that I was more mature and smarter and wiser than I actually was. And so while that was unfortunate and it meant that I made a lot of mistakes, I'm grateful because all of those mistakes, right? Remember this idea of in order to be older and wiser, you had to be younger and dumber. And so while I didn't like the process and I wish I didn't have to learn it that way, I'm grateful for it because it allowed me to be who I am today, and it's contributed to who I am today. And so I met this man and everything was great. We traveled, you know, nothing was ever too expensive. He was always around when I needed him. And I was barely sleeping then, and so it wasn't a big deal that he wasn't home all the time. I liked having my space, and to this day I still do. And it's so interesting because I remember a particular incident where the one friend that I did have, because I wasn't out there for long, but I had trouble making friends because there weren't many Black people, let alone Black women there. And the one friend that I did have, our friendship ended up breaking up because she tried to tell me. And this is I don't have many regrets, but this is something that I wish she's moved out of the country, so I didn't know how to contact her. I did try, but it was a friend of mine, and she had found out that he was married, and she tried to tell me. And he convinced me that she was jealous, and he had people lie to me and tell me all kinds of things, child. And I was that in love at the time that I believed him, and I ended up, dissolving a friendship. And I'm not the only one in that. We see it all the time. I know it's probably happened to you. Sometimes we get mad at the messenger because we don't like the message. And what's so interesting is that even when she told me, I always say now is that I knew. I didn't, and I own it. I didn't know, but I knew. Like, I didn't know, but I knew. You know, I think, people call it women's intuition, but I don't think it's women. It's not just reserved for women, right? This idea of getting into it and being in touch with yourself. It's because we all have that knowing. You know how that when you come into a room and you shake somebody's hand and you meet somebody for the first time and you just, something in you is like, no. You got alarms blaring. It's just like, nah. I think we all have that, right? Where certain people and certain situations, certain places just trigger us. But sometimes, especially when nobody's more dangerous than a desperate man. I learned that. My brother taught me that at a young age. Nobody's more desperate than nobody's more dangerous than a desperate man, because when you don't have, and when you're lacking, and when you're thirsty, and when you're empty, you'll do just about anything to get what you want. And at that time, I was so empty. I was so empty that even though I felt it in my spirit that something wasn't right, I didn't know it was that extreme, as extreme as marriage. But I thought maybe he might have had somebody else, or he was seeing other people. I didn't really know, but I knew something wasn't right. Because he knew what to do, but he always had a point where he would hesitate and he would stop. And so when she tried to tell me, I did break up with him briefly because I believed her at first, and I made the mistake of letting him back in, and he convinced me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I had finally found something real and something safe, so much that I was willing to lie to myself to keep it. And that isn't something that I am proud of. But again, I know, and now that I've used my testimony, I haven't shared it on a public platform, but I have used it. in individual sessions with clients. And I've learned that I'm not the only one. And maybe for you, it's not about being a mistress, but it's something, right? Where you want it so bad that you're willing to lie to yourself to keep it. Even if you know it's not real, you know it's not forever, right? And so I'm so grateful and thankful that I had so many other things happening in my life at that time, including the fact that I was not happy at my job, and I was very homesick. Mind you, at that time, and again, God works everything out for my good, my mom had gotten into a horrible car accident, and she broke her collarbone, and it just kind of made me, and I had to fly. I got stuck, but I had to fly, like trying to fly impromptu from the Midwest to North Carolina was not an easy thing, but staying with her for an extended period of time, it made me realize that I wanted to come back home, or at least get back on the East Coast. And so as just life would have it, I ended up looking for other opportunities, and I wasn't really happy at my job, and looking for other opportunities. And it just so happened that the one that was the most ideal for me brought me back to Philly. And so I think, again, it was all God, and I didn't even realize it. On top of that, that same relationship, he suggested an IUD. I wasn't really, like, again, I've heard that people have speculated about how sexually active I was. I really was not. I'm not a stranger to it, but I was nowhere near as sexually active as people probably thought I was. And so birth control wasn't even a thing. But he, in our conversations, we decided for me to get an IUD or an implant. And that IUD had me bleeding consistently for over a year. And so I was dating this man, but we weren't even sexually active that much because I was always bleeding. And again, I look back on it, I didn't know it then, but I know it now that was God, because God did not want that soul tie to be that deep. And I think that had we been more sexually active, who knows if I would have had the courage to leave later. And so anyway, I ended up moving back to Philly, and I was getting more, just because I wasn't really happy. I didn't know why I wasn't happy. On the outside, it looked like I had stuff, and not that I was happy, but on the inside, I really wasn't happy. And so I started to dive deeper, and that's when I started my spiritual journey. That's when I started my fitness journey. And I was in search of happy, in search of me, in search of happy. And as I was doing that, and I was doing it long distance, that knowing in my heart just kept getting bigger and bigger, to the point where I never forget. He had come into town with, mind you, I had met his family, I met his friends. Like, it was just so hard to believe that, like that everyone was so okay with what he was doing. But they have all flew, because mind you, again, money wasn't really an issue for us. And so even though we were long distance for a period of time, we were flying back and forth to where I was seeing him like every 2 weeks. So like, it didn't feel like it was long distance, but it wasn't as dramatic as maybe some other people. But I forget one of my birthdays, they flew into town, and I just wasn't feeling it. Like, I wanted to be anywhere else. And mind you, my birthday is a really important day for me, because I'm usually, despite people think, I know I'm very over the top and very dramatic, but I try my best to not make everything about me. But on my birthday, that is the one day, the one exception, the one time that it's all about me. And I make sure that everybody knows it. And this was one particular birthday where I was literally, I was so unhappy. Even though they were trying their best to make me happy, and he called me ungrateful later, and he called me a brat later. But I just was not happy because I didn't feel right. And they ended up flying home, and then days later, I didn't remember on my actual birthday, my mom and my sister, one of my sisters FaceTimed me, and they were like, "You having fun?" And I was just like, "No." And I didn't know why I was crying. They were like, "Why are you crying?" I don't really know. I know that I remember him seeing me. He could tell I was crying, that I had been crying, but he didn't ask why. But I was just like, something's not right. And I don't feel happy. I don't feel good about this. And so I actually broke up with him before I found out officially that I was a mistress. because I just wasn't feeling it. I was like, I let him know, hey, I'm in a new space in my life and this just isn't working. And so at first it was fine, and we went some time without speaking to each other. And then, again, like, I'm just very forgiving, very loving. And so he reached out, and we ended up like, hey, listen, we're not together, but we can still be friends, right? And so we were friends. And he was still, helping me out when I needed him. He was still there to talk to, but it was less pressure because we weren't actually dating. But before long, feelings came back, and I was actually considering us getting back together. And so his birthday was coming up, and he was saying, like, he was thinking that we should give it another shot, and he wanted to go on a trip for his birthday. And I said, okay, that's fine. I need to get away. Let's do that. But I remember I was like, God, we had been doing so much work, and I had been doing so well, and I was seeing progress, and I was happier. I was home. I was rebuilding relationships with my family. It was just, everything was moving. I was just like, I don't want to lose this momentum. And if he is not it, I don't care what you got to do, but shut it down. And, they say, be careful what you pray for. Because literally, I want to say days before our trip, I get a phone call. Well, correction, it was several phone calls. I usually don't answer numbers that I don't recognize. But for some reason, this one number called me like 6 times back to back. I recognized the area code, was the city that I used to live in. And so I answered it. And it's interesting because I think, now that I think about it, when it was his wife. When she first called, I think she had it in her mind to lay me out and to read me for filth, from her tone. But I think when she realized that I was genuinely confused, she changed her approach. And for that, and we actually ended up talking on the phone for about 3 hours. And this may have largely to do with the fact that she was twice my age. And so her maturity level was a little bit different than like today. But I can't tell you how frustrating it is. I've been one of those girls and one of those women where, the women are so busy fighting each other that they don't hold the man accountable, right? Or vice versa. The men are so busy, like we don't hold the right person accountable. But one thing I can appreciate about her and how it all happened was that we were both mature enough to have that conversation. But it didn't mean that it didn't break my heart. We sat on the phone and we were just comparing stories, and it's just funny, but not funny or ironic. Maybe I should stop saying funny and start saying ironic, but it's ironic how literally we were swapping information, and there were moments, like distinctive moments and times and events and things that happened where on one side of the US, I was feeling and thinking something, and she was on the other side thinking and feeling the same things. And it turns out that she was the same way, that she didn't know, but she knew. And actually, she knew more about me than I knew about her. Because people had seen us, because we weren't hiding it. It wasn't a secret because I didn't know. But I also was not from that area, so I also didn't have anybody who would tell me either. Because they were everybody who I knew was his friend and his family. And so it's kind of like she had home court advantage. But she had been building a case against him with me for a while. And he had gone, and I found out he had gone through great lengths to keep us both in his life. Great lengths. And I'm talking to her, and mind you, at that time I had still been grieving. I had some months and I had some time to grieve that relationship. And so while I still had feelings for him, there were some things that I had already moved past and I had learned to accept. But I can't tell you how heartbreaking it was for me to have to hear her. It was just like, and she was, and I didn't have, I felt like I owed it to her. So like I had to sit in it, like, when you make your bed, you have to lie in it. And it was just, to this day, one of the most heartbreaking, but also the most transformational things that's ever happened in my life, of having to sit there and listen to her cry and just her genuinely being heartbroken, and to know that I had something to do with that really, really hurt me and broke my heart. But I sat in that with her, and I remember distinctly telling her that I was sorry, that I was so sorry. Because and she's like, you had nothing to apologize for. I was like, no, because I knew. I didn't know, but I knew. And I knew better. And again, my hat goes off to this woman, and which is why I'm so happy to hear that they've been able to reconcile and move past it, because even after that, she was still like, no, we all do things. And Ashton, I was in the same, she admitted to being in the same boat, and that she was just happy to know, you know, and I feel like she let me off easy, and I didn't like that. Because I grew up in a house with heavy discipline. But she was so compassionate and so understanding, even in the midst of her pain. And even after we hung up, that was the very last time it was the first and the last time I ever spoke to her. It was also the last day that I ever spoke verbally to him. And it's so sad about how even at the same time and my dad got the phone night, I had my share of tears too, and I was very sad. But it didn't really hit me until maybe 2 days later. Because even though I knew, I knew here, and I knew in my mind, and I knew in my heart. And it's interesting how somebody can hurt you and you still love them. And like I was hurting, I knew it was over. But a part of me still wanted him to, like, I expected, I don't know if I wanted it, but I expected him to fight for it. I expected him to at least try to lie or try to fix it, and he didn't. I got no explanation, really. The apology came way later, after I had already forgiven. But it broke my heart that I had literally defied myself and everything that I stood for somebody who didn't even think I was worthy of an explanation. And when that hit me, it wasn't that same day, because I had waited a day or two. So like the first day I blocked him. For me, I'm a blocker. I am a known blocker. Okay, when I reach a certain level of emotion, and I know that it's only going to get bad or worse, I gotta distance myself, and that's my last act of kindness usually when it comes to in conflict. And so I block out of respect. Listen, because I don't want to say something that I don't mean. I don't want to do something I want to regret later. Let me just put some distance between us. And so I don't know if he called that first day, but I do know that up to 3 days later, I hadn't heard from him, and I literally broke down. And I'm in my office at my house, but there's a hallway right outside this door, and I was literally in that hallway on the floor in the fetal position, crying my eyes out, like, how the hell did I get here again? To be so empty and to crave love so bad that I was willing to just continually subject myself to abuse and pain and just to operate below the woman I knew that I was. And I remember I just literally cried. I just laid there. And mind you, I have hardwood floors, and I was literally just laying on the hardwood floor naked, because I just got out the shower, literally baby fetal position. And you know, it's interesting, like one of my favorite rappers is DMX. I remember one of his interviews, he said, you know, one of the reasons why he got to know God is because every time he was in some stuff, you know, he got closer to God. And because he was always in something, he got closer to God. And that's kind of been my story of, like, when you are in those moments where you have reached rock bottom and you have nowhere and no one else to go to. And I didn't know who to tell. I do know my best friend, she was aware of how I was feeling. I remember I sat up with her. We had a sleepover one night, and I was sitting with her, and I was like, something's not right. And we didn't have any proof, and we didn't know where to start and where to look. And we're not detectives, and I don't like going through it that deep. But I remember her comforting me, my childhood best friend, and she was just like, God will reveal. You pray, God will reveal. And I think so. She's one of the reasons why, before we were going on that trip, I did ask God, if it's not right, shut it down. And he shut it down in a way that he knew was going to hit home for me. He knew that she had to call. He knew that I had to hear her voice, and he knew that I had to hear her cry. He knew exactly what it was going to take to get me out of there. And while I didn't like it, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because when I was on that floor, I told myself, and I promised myself, I'm like, God, if you can get me off this floor, whatever you can get me, if you can redeem me from this, child, I will do whatever you say. Whatever you say. And I promised myself that, Tania, if you ever get up from this position, you will never be here again. Never. And I did get up. And I did move on. And I can admit that I was never there again. And it also ended up being the start to my self-discovery journey. I knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that there was no way, and I knew I was going to eventually be here. I didn't know it was going to be podcast form or in this capacity, but I knew that ultimately I wanted to spend my life helping people heal and get better and to be happy. I didn't know that I'd be using my own testimony and my own life to do it, but I knew I wanted to be here. And I knew that I could not pour from an empty cup. And so I really the research that I used to use and I used to apply on everybody else, I started digging in and doing it myself, to the point where my friends were like, Tania, you don't have to pick yourself apart every single day. You don't have to work on yourself every single day. But I was like, for the hell I don't. You don't know what I got going on in here. I'm crazy. But I remember I was in a constant state of just getting to know me and loving me. I wanted to love me so hard so that I would never be here again. And it wasn't an easy journey, definitely. It was definitely one filled with a lot of shame. I remember I even paused in my fitness journey and started to eat excessively again. I gained a lot of weight to the point where I even got to 250. I was over 250. So today, people are seeing me, I look drastic. I've lost 78 pounds. But at one point, and some of it was me losing the excess weight that I gained during that season of just being depressed. But I was just like, I gotta fix this. And I was never really certain, and I've been very selective about who I shared that story with, because, it was already enough that I was ashamed, but I knew that people and their opinions and their judgment was going to make it much worse. And I think it's always helpful that we're mindful of how we share our stories and to whom we share our stories and the state that you are in when you share it. I have this thing, and it actually might even be here. Is it here? It is. I call it my boss talk checklist, where I ask myself, where am I at in my healing journey, right? Am I still hurt? Am I hung up, or am I healing, right? And you'll notice it's kind of in the shape of a stoplight. And that's because I think, it's important that depending on where you are in that process and your healing journey, is going to determine, number one, what story you tell yourself, and number two, what story you tell others. And there's danger in telling your story when you're in a hurt place, because you say things that you don't mean. And you may not always be telling the correct story, because all of your emotions and everything is so high and so extreme. Reflect on what I did, but I'm also able to pull out the lessons and to hopefully use it to empower others. But more importantly, I'm in a place where people can't put shame on me that I no longer have. And you can't make me feel bad about something that I have already come to peace with, that God has forgiven me for, and that I've been able to learn and to grow from. And so maybe for those who are listening, that isn't your story. Maybe you weren't a mistress, but we've all done things that we are ashamed of, things that we said we would never do, that we did, things that I know guilt and shame that we're still holding on to. And mind you, this is only one of many of those things for me, but it's probably one of the biggest. And I'm saying that I don't care what it is and what you've done, you can always come back from that. You know, I always feel like, you know, one of the reasons why Jesus died for our sins is because like God already knew, he knew before we were even born that we was going to be raggedy and that we were going to make mistakes. And one of the best things about, and again, whether you believe in God or not, but there's always an opportunity to redeem yourself. You never have to stay there. But it's important that, you know, you learn how to forgive yourself. And I think learning how to forgive yourself allows you to forgive others. You know, and that's where true growth is, you know. And I'm grateful for it. So grateful for it. And I do hope that, again, if nothing else, the mistakes that I made, I always hope, you know, hey, we learn things through different ways: education, exposure, or experience, right? And so if you're like me and you weren't formally taught about how to date and how to process your, you know, your healing and how to forgive yourself and how to manage shame and guilt, you know, I'd rather you not learn it through experience like I had to learn it. And maybe that just having exposure to my story and my journey is helpful to you. And that's the risk that I'm willing to take in sharing it. And wherever you are in that process, whether you are hurt, hung up in healing, just be intentional about the story that you're telling yourself, right? And some things you don't know until you know. And so learn how to give yourself grace, but more importantly, learn how to give other people grace, because the grace that you give is the grace that you receive. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Hell, I'm a living testament.